So in this video, we're going to talk about Matteo Esposito's play Moonchild. Now, Matteo had actually contacted me, I guess, a few weeks ago now, maybe even a month, asking if I would take a look at a couple of his plays that have been, they've been produced, but there have also been readings of them on YouTube. So he asked if I would take a look at them and review them for the channel. And it's taken me a little while to get around to them. So first off, sorry, Matteo, for how long it's taken me to get to the plays. But I have now watched Moonchild. I'm going to watch your other play, and a video about that will go up next week, so be on the lookout for that. So, Moonchild is it's a play about a young child named Harry, who has autism, and he wants to be a painter. Basically, the struggle is twofold. The one struggle is that his father, who is a businessman, does not believe in him and doesn't really believe in the value of the arts or creativity or expression and things like this. As we find out sort of toward the end portion of the play, what his father believes in is basically, if you can sell it, then it has value. So there's that element of it. The other element of Harry's struggle is that he doesn't believe in himself. And this is really probably the more dominant struggle, in part because this lack of self-confidence, this lack of belief that he can be successful is reinforced by his father's bullshit. Let's just go ahead and call it that. So this is a pretty straightforward piece of disability theater, I would say. There's a theorist of disability theater named Kristen Johnston. I can't remember. I will try to remember to put a caption at the bottom of this video with her proper name, whether it's Johnson or Johnston. But she does make a distinction between disability arts and art by artists with disabilities. So art by artists with disabilities is simply art or theater or whatever it is that's created by a person who happens to have a disability, but it's not necessarily focused on the issues of disability, the issues of how people with disabilities, whether that's developmental disabilities, whether that's physical disabilities, whatever it is, how they fit into society and how society tries to limit the opportunities available to people with disabilities. So there's art by people with disabilities that's not about that. And that's Johnston, KJ. I'll call her KJ because, no, I'll call her Johnston. And if I'm wrong about that, sorry. So in this schema, there are artists with disabilities who create art that's not about the experience of having a disability. Then there's disability art or disability theater, since she writes specifically about theater. A disability theater is focused on the experience of being disabled within society. So what are the challenges that people with disabilities face? How is it that society attempts to limit their potential to define their roles, to define what they can and cannot do, etc., etc. Moonchild falls squarely in that category. It is disability theater. The primary focus of this play is Harry's struggle to overcome the limitations put on him both by his father and by his own doubts in order to become a painter, to become an artist. And he's helped in this journey by the moon. So Harry's dad tells him to, basically in the early portion of the play, Harry's dad comes home, finds Harry painting at the table, as you would, a normal person would set if you wanted to start painting and you didn't really have a dedicated space for it. Makes sense. Harry's dad's like, no, son, outside. I know it's nighttime, but you're going to go outside and paint. And Harry's like, okay. Because Harry loves his dad. He's a good kid, etc., etc. Even though his dad's a prick. We'll talk about the dad later. So Harry goes outside, and the moon speaks to Harry. And the moon... So the thing is, it's a very didactic play, in that a lot of the focus is very directly on the moon giving these uplifting messages. And they're very straightforward uplifting messages, revolving around ideas like you can do whatever you set your mind to, you can be incredibly creative as long as you believe in yourself and work hard, etc., etc. There's one thing I really liked, one phrase I really liked. I actually wrote it down here. I keep this little book of random things I like out of stuff I read and see. And the moon says, to guarantee success, act as though it's impossible to fail. And so this is the kind of thing. Like the moon, again, it's very uplifting. It's very straightforward, though. There's not a ton of complexity to the moon's role for the most part. It is very much about sending a direct message to people with disabilities to believe in themselves and to work, and even people without disabilities, to believe in themselves, to work hard, to commit to what they want to achieve in order to be successful. That your disability does not, or your talent, or whatever it is, does not limit how successful you can be, provided you believe in yourself. This is a great message, again, and very straightforward, very uplifting, very didactic. This is the theme of the play that's really, really foregrounded. One of the things that is really interesting about the moon as a character, we actually get very late in the play, and that's the idea that the moon is specifically concerned about how society functions or how people get along with one another. Because the moon actually says to Harry toward the end of the play that, like, the reason that I, the moon, am here is to give people light in the darkness. And so, I mean, we learn throughout the play that the moon periodically talks to people and encourages them to follow their dreams, etc., etc. And the moon has seen a lot of people not follow through, not follow their dreams. And so that's part of the reason why the moon spends so much time encouraging Harry to believe in himself. But it's an interesting idea that the moon is somehow invested in human beings fulfilling our potential, that it's symbolically important in terms of providing light in the darkness, etc., etc. That's a really, really interesting read of the moon as a very traditional and multifaceted symbol in art. The other person I want to talk about in the play specifically is the dad. Now, first off, I want to say, I want this to be absolutely clear. I'm not questioning the reality of this depiction, because I know one of the big challenges that people with disabilities, people with conditions like autism very often face is families, teachers, religious leaders, people who are supposed to be in positions of support, people who are supposed to help, who are supposed to be teachers, guiders, etc., very often are not good at that role because of the particular differences in how people with autism or Down syndrome or whatever it is interact with the world. Neurodivergent people often experience a lack of faith from those who are supposed to be supporting them, a lack of support, a lack of concern, an inability to understand, frustration with them, etc., etc. So I'm not at all questioning the reality of this depiction, but the dad is an absolute dick for reasons that don't really make that much sense to me. Like, when we learn later in the play that he's a businessman and all he really values is anything that's profitable, okay, it makes a little bit more sense. But basically, the dad is just an asshole throughout this play. Like, he's incredibly dismissive of Harry's desire to be a painter and basically says, you're not going to be a painter. He actually tells him people with autism fail, which is such a fucked up thing to say to your kid. He almost never says, Harry repeatedly says, I love you, Dad. Or I love you, Daddy, I think. And the dad does not respond. The dad does not say, I love you too, or anything like that throughout most of the play. The dad's primary interactions with Harry are either, no, you can't be a painter because you have autism and you'll fail at it, or leave me alone. He's a dick. And I mean, again, I get that this is a potentially true to life representation, unfortunately. And I get that this character is meant to fulfill a role within Harry's conflict. On a personal level, though, I find it very, very hard to relate to the dad because of how terrible he is at providing even the most basic of support for his child. And, I mean, for me, I don't know. Again, I think the best way to put it is I find it hard to relate to that character. I find it hard to see things from his perspective or to understand why he would treat Harry in the way that he does. But I think that's also part of what this play is about doing. What Moonchild is about doing is about bringing some of these issues, some of these concerns into the public sphere, into this space of artistic expression, and establishing in a public way the legitimacy of artists with disabilities. Now, of course, the other element to this, I know a little bit about Matteo from his website and things like that. I know he does have autism himself. I think there's another element to disability theater very often, which is that theater made by artists with disabilities, or art created by artists with disabilities, is itself counter-evidence to the narrative that people with disabilities cannot succeed, or a counter-narrative to the idea expressed by Harry's father that people with autism fail. The very fact that Matteo succeeds and that other artists with disabilities create art is evidence that they are perfectly capable of creating art.